So, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this short webinar on the Trees Call to Action Fund, which opened this week. We will be running through an overview of the fund this morning. We'll be looking at its strategic context, so we'll be going through the England Trees Action Plan. We'll talk about what we're looking for. We'll talk a little bit about the process of applying, so the expressions of interest process and what we're looking for there. And then we will go through whichever Padlet questions we can fit in the time available. You can add to the Padlet as we go, but what I would say is that if there's a particular question that you would like answered, please like that question rather than re-entering the question, because it can get a little bit difficult to keep up with. Next slide, please. So we have 4 people on the call today. I'm not going to introduce everybody individually, but just to repeat, I'm Zelda, and I manage the DEFRA Grant in Aid programmes on behalf of the Heritage Fund at the moment. Right, I'm now going to hand you over to Ralph, who can introduce himself. Over to you, Ralph.
Great, thanks very much, Zelda, and I do hope my internet connection stays up throughout this. Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for joining. My name's Ralph Weir. I'm a team leader in the DEFRA Forestry policy team, and I've been working with Zelda on the design of the Trees Call to Action Fund. Can I have the next slide, please? So the policy context for this, I'm sure you're all familiar with every word of the England Trees Action Plan. If you're not, it's a good read. It was published this May by DEFRA, and it does everything that it says on the slide. It's a long-term vision for trees and woodland in England to 2050. It sets out our plans to deliver the Nature for Climate Fund, which government announced for this Parliament, and it acts as a call to action for landowners, managers, the third sector, communities, charities, and everyone to get involved in a national effort to increase tree planting, look after the trees we already have, and engage the public in that. Next slide, please. So where does the Trees Call to Action Fund come from? The Nature for Climate Fund is our headline overall programme and funding for trees, and it's being delivered through a range of grants, funds and partnerships, which I'm sure many of your organisations are familiar with. Things like the England Woodland Creation Offer, which is there to plant woodlands on particular land holdings, or the Urban Tree Challenge Fund for planting in urban areas, or partnerships such as the Community Forests, Northern Forest, Cornwall, Northumberland partnerships. The Trees Call to Action Fund has been designed to respond to the interest we see from organisations and partnerships outside government to get involved. There are a lot of organisations with fantastic ideas and fantastic proposals, which we saw a great deal of through the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, of proposals people put forward and got funding to deliver. So we're interested in building further capacity in those organisations to deliver projects at regional and national scale over the next 3 years, but particularly covering costs which you can't meet through other DEFRA Group or NCF funds. Next slide, please. So what are we looking for? We're looking for projects that can deliver against multiple objectives from the England Trees Action Plan. So the 4 objectives here are the chapter titles from the Trees Action Plan of expanding and connecting trees and woodlands as part of the green economy, protecting and improving trees and woodlands, and connecting people. I'm sure you've all read the fund guidance online, which we've worked with Zelda on, but if not, do have a read. It explains exactly what we're looking for. Within that, it provides some suggestions of some priority project types, which DEFRA is interested in, which relate to regional woodland creation partnerships, improving access to trees and woodlands, and developing skills. Though, as noted on the slide here, those are not exhaustive. We know there are other ideas out there. We are interested in those, but you will need to show in your application how that can meet the multiple objectives of the Trees Action Plan. Next slide, please. So the details. This is a £6 million fund with grants to be distributed of £250,000 to £500,000. Grants will be awarded in March, around March, depending on timelines, for projects to deliver over 3 years. We're looking for projects at regional or national scale, so not local scale, and we might come back onto that. We're looking for proposals where you're looking for costs you can't get from elsewhere. So, for example, if you were looking to create a woodland, the England Woodland Creation Offer is the one for you, and do apply to Forestry Commission for that, and we'll come back onto that. And we are interested in seeing, or we require a 5% cash match in all projects, which can't be from National Lottery or DEFRA Group funds. And as mentioned before, and I'm sure will be mentioned again, please see the fund guidance for further detail on eligible costs, as it's all in there. Next slide, please. So who can apply? We're looking for proposals from partnerships. We know that partnerships can deliver at greater scale and get the right people involved. And we want those to be partnerships of local authorities, environmental charities and not-for-profit organisations, and protected landscape bodies. We know from DEFRA experience that when these different groups work together, that's when we see the kind of landscape scale change and protection of natural capital assets that we'd like to see. And whilst there is absolutely value in some of these other things, we're not looking for single site projects at local scale or solo applicants or applications from partnerships in areas already receiving DEFRA funding for woodland creation partnerships. I recognise that's a fair amount of DEFRA jargon, but to simplify that, we're already providing quite significant funding to groups such as the Community Forests Network, Northumberland, Cornwall, the National Forest Company. We don't want to provide further funding in areas where there are already projects up and running, and we prefer to see applicants in those areas working with existing partnerships. Next slide, please. So ineligible costs and other funding. The bit in bold is the important bit, is that you can't apply for costs which you could meet through other DEFRA group funds. And the reason for that is that there are other grants which are fit for purpose for those, and we want to reduce the risks of double subsidy by government of a particular asset. You know, we don't want to fund the same cost of tree planting twice, as that reduces value for money for the taxpayer. So if you are thinking about a range of activities to do with tree planting and woodland management, please take a look at that list of grants there and see whether your costs can be met through those. There is a caveat there of if you can make a clear case that your costs can't be met through those will be considered and reviewed by one of our Forestry Commission colleagues to check whether you could be eligible for funding. Through EOIs, we're expecting projects to rely on the guidance to develop their projects. But if you then proceed to a full application, we are going to encourage those who proceed at full application to talk to their local Forestry Commission team, largely to check on that. Are you applying for the right guidance, and are you joined up with the right local partners? I'm sure will provide some added value. Next slide, please. So I'll pass over to Zelda on the process.
Thanks, Ralph. Right, yes, so I'll talk you through the expression of interest process next. This is as Ralph described, it's a two-stage process. First, we invite you to do a short expression of interest. That will be assessed, and then you'll be notified whether or not that's successful. Only at that point would you proceed to the full application. So we're trying to keep this, we do appreciate it's quite a short turnaround, or a very short turnaround, but this is a light touch initial first step for you. So we do stress you must read the guidance before you complete this. We have produced a supplementary guide on how to fill out the expression of interest form. So if you go to the Trees Call to Action Fund webpage on our website, scroll down to the Further Help and Resources section, you can click on that and you will get to an expression of interest guide. And what that does is it lists out all the questions that we ask you on that form and says how we want you to reply to that. The reason we do that is because we have one set of forms that are in common across all our funds, and when you're actually in our online portal, you might find it's asking you, it might give you a slightly different description of what's required. Just refer back to our published guidance on that. It is a short form, it is 800 words maximum, and I believe it does stop you from submitting if you're going over word count, as far as I'm aware. So do make sure that you're using that word count wisely. You don't need to give us loads of narrative. It doesn't need to be very beautifully, finely crafted advocacy and word, flowery words. Just sort of keep it short, factual. It's fine. Short sentences are absolutely fine. Really focus in on making it clear that we can understand what it is you want to do, which of the ETAP objectives you're going to meet and how. So it's very much the what, the where, the why and the who, that wider strategic context of how your proposal fits in. We do ask you to submit outline costs, but they can be very top level at this stage. Obviously, we do recognise you won't have had time to put together a detailed cost plan, but do split that out across partners so we can see loosely where we see the sort of funding split going. And if you can, give us the kind of top level cost categories, so staff costs, activity or revenue costs, capital costs if applicable to your project. Do break it down a little bit and give us an indication also of what level of match funding you think you might be able to include. Now, as I've said, this is an online form. Those of you who are familiar with the Heritage Fund but haven't applied for a while, you may or may not be aware that we changed our online portal over the summer. So if you haven't applied to us for a while, you will need to re-register. Do follow the links on the website. And what we say is, don't leave registering on the website until 11 o'clock of the deadline day. Do give yourself a bit of time. The form you can go in and out of, it'll save as you go. So you can start it this afternoon if you like, and just work on it as and when. And the other sort of critical point is we do ask you to start your project title with #DEFRA. Now, the reason we do that is that we are open for multiple funds at the moment and they all use the same form. And so we use the hashtag as our ability to direct traffic to the appropriate fund. So it is really important that you include that #DEFRA at the start of your project title. We will, of course, pick up your project if you don't use that, but it will get delayed because it may ping off to another team, or it may get looked at by not the people who are working on this fund. The deadline for submission is 12 noon on the 16th of November. We will be strict about the time on that, so any coming in after that time will not be looked at. What I would say, though, is if you're experiencing some extreme computer or internet meltdown, please do get on the phone to us or and let us know, and we'll try and work with you on that. If you're experiencing an extreme problem and don't let us know, we won't accept it. And if you do let us know, we'll try and work with you and make sure that you get it through in time. Can we have the next slide, please? So how do we assess these? Well, expressions of interest are assessed internally by Heritage Fund staff, and as Ralph said, we will be also assessed by Forestry Commission staff. So this is a partnership project. First, we look at your baseline eligibility. So that's, is it a project in England? Is it working in a partnership? Is it working at a regional or national scale? Is it for the correct sum of money? If you don't meet the eligibility criteria, you get knocked out at that point. We then move on to quality criteria, and all expressions of interest will be scored against those 5 criteria. So that's the strength of contribution to the England Trees Action Plan objectives, the overall deliverability of the project within the timescale you've stated, your wider fit strategically, the appropriateness of your project partners, so are the right people coming to the project, and the overall value for money against the grant amount requested. And for value for money, we'll be including within that both the level of match funding being proposed and also that question of whether or not your project could actually be more usefully applying to other DEFRA group funds. So are you clearly meeting that gap need? After we've done that initial scoring, we then all get together. So that's DEFRA, Forestry Commission, and ourselves, Heritage Fund, and we look at the balance of the top scoring projects. If it's oversubscribed, we will prioritise those that meet multiple ETAP objectives. We will also be looking for priority to areas with the highest potential for woodland creation and or low current tree cover, seeking to address inequalities in access. After that, we reach the final list and we will email you with the results. We're aiming to keep the pace up, so I know you don't have much time to do the expression of interest. We don't have much time to do the assessment either. So you've got 10 days and we've got 10 days, after which you should receive an email telling you whether or not we're asking you to proceed or not. If you are invited to proceed, you'll then have 7 weeks to do the full application, and I'll talk a tiny bit more about that at the end of the webinar. So what I would say is that it is competitive at all levels. If you are invited to proceed, that'll still be a competitive application. We anticipate that we won't invite more than double the available funds, but it's 6 million. So we anticipate at the end, well, if you take the top and bottom possible grants, the minimum and maximum will be 15 to 24 grants. So it is quite a contained pot. Right, at this point, I suggest we move over to the Padlet questions. Next slide, please, Ryan. I'll ask Ralph if you can answer the first few.
Thanks very much, everyone, for your questions, and we will do our best to answer as many of them as we can now. If there are some which we need to get a policy view from other teams on, we may need to promise to come back to you with those, with a sort of summary of responses. So we'll work through these in order. The first question asks, does the funding apply to hedgerows? So as we noted, we are interested in you applying for costs which you can't get through other DEFRA Group grants. Countryside Stewardship does provide the capital costs of planting a hedgerows to landowners, but if there are other project costs related to hedgerow tree planting which you might not be able to get through Countryside Stewardship, that would be eligible for this grant. The next question. The second question is about ash dieback. So projects to address pests and diseases would need to be at regional or national scale, though I would suggest that if you're dealing with ash dieback, that you first consider whether you could apply to Countryside Stewardship's Tree Health Grant for single site projects, the Local Authority Treescapes Fund for restocking areas of trees outside woodlands which have been affected by disease. And if you are in the Northwest, Southeastern London or the West Midlands, Forestry Commission are developing a tree health pilot scheme. So would first have a look at those. And if you are not in those areas or not trying to undertake those kinds of activities, then you could bid into this fund at regional or national scale. Next question, can Environment Agency money be used as match funding? So as included in the fund guidance, funding from DEFRA Group cannot be used as match funding, and the rationale for that is it reduces the value for money for the taxpayer because we're paying for something twice. So Environment Agency money would not be eligible as match. Second part of that question was, can local authority funding be used as match funding? Yes, local authority funding can be used as match funding, and the reason for that is local authorities raise funds from a range of sources such as developer contributions, council tax. So there's not the same value for money question for government overall, so that is eligible. What is the definition of national? So an example of national might be you're a national charity delivering on a range of sites across the country or with a range of communities. I think that would count as national. And if you were delivering it in 2 regions, that again would count as regional or nationals. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. There's a question there about, will there be a series of these funding calls with the same criteria? So there's not a proper answer to that, but essentially this fund is a pilot. We have funding for this year to be distributed this year. I would advise if you have a project which you're interested in getting funding for, that you put in an application this year and do not wait to assume that there'll be funding in future. We will of course review what is the depth and quality of the pipeline that comes forward this time. And if there is a significant unfunded need this time of projects which are value for money, we can of course consider whether we do a future round. But I wouldn't plan to assume there will be the same fund next year. So I hope that's useful. Zelda, I think the next questions on this list are ones you might be able to answer.
Yes, certainly. So project on costs, those are your on costs of any staff employed by, employed as part of the project. So that's national insurance, pension, apprenticeships levies, if appropriate. So that's what we mean by the term on costs. And the question, do we need to submit a project plan with the expression of interest? No, you do not. The expression of interest is a standalone document, no attachments required. Everything has to go into that 800 words. Right, there are a number of other questions now pinging into the Padlet. Can we just remind you, if the question already exists, please can you like the existing question and not retype it in? Because otherwise it becomes difficult to see, and we'll prioritise the ones that have got the most likes. So if you see a question that you really want answered, please like it. Okay, 4 likes on can Green Recovery Challenge Fund projects apply for follow-on funding? You've got a grant from Green Recovery Challenge Fund ending in March 22. Can you apply for follow-on funding? I would say as long as you are meeting the fund's criteria, we wouldn't necessarily expect it to be a direct repeat of the Green Recovery Challenge Fund because that had quite different criteria. But as long as you're meeting this fund's criteria, then yes. Ralph, would you agree with that?
Yes, as long as it's meeting England Tree Action Plan criteria rather than GRCF objectives, and that we would be covering different costs to the GRCF project, and you'd probably want to explain the GRCF project had been delivered to plan.
Yes, absolutely. What data sets will be used to assess low current tree cover and inequalities in access? That might be one for David, if you're with us, or do you want to say Ralph? You can say Ralph.
Yeah, so Forestry Commission have publicly available data sets on low tree cover and inequalities in access to trees, which I can't remember the URL, but it's forestryarc.gis, and it's the Urban Tree Challenge Fund data set. And the manner in which that will be used is as balancing criteria. So, for example, if there were 2 projects proposing the same kind of access to nature project, you might compare which is in an area of greatest need. So that's the manner in which it would be used once we've already thought about the quality criteria of the project overall.
Thanks, Ralph. There are a lot of likes for a question on halo areas. So will a partnership be eligible to apply if its area falls within a regional forest halo area?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that returns to the point made earlier. So DEFRA is funding a range of woodland creation partnerships around the country. So the Community Forest Programme across a range of areas, the Great Northumberland Forest, the Northern Forest and others. We're really interested in seeing those projects developing and continuing to succeed. So we are not looking to add further funding for other partnerships which might overlap. If you have a project in those areas, we'd encourage you to engage with those existing partnerships and see how you could work together. But we would not be looking to provide additional funding through this fund, as we're looking to target other areas of the country which are not already in receipt of DEFRA funds.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm just trying to see what's next. Top rated. I think we've done regional, national. We've got 10 likes. Do we need partnerships funding in place before submitting an expression of interest, or can formation of a future partnership be part of the expression of interest? That seems to me to be 2 questions in once. We would expect you to have, sorry, I misread that, my apologies. Do we need a partnership in place? It's not partnership funding. we would expect you to be well on the way to having a partnership in place. You will need, if invited to apply, you will need a draft partnership agreement as part of the supporting documents. So if you've got no one, if you're starting from scratch at this point, then I would recommend that you're probably not going to be competitive. Ralph, would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So there's a question here about local and regional, which has had a couple of comments on. So to provide some indicative examples of what we mean by regional, so DEFRA's funded the Great Northumberland Forest Project, started in the last few years, the Forest for Cornwall initiative, the National Forest Company. Those are being delivered at county scale or above, or multiple counties joined together. That's the scale of project we're looking for, which we think is an appropriate.
Okay. I need to update because you've got, there's more questions on there than I've got in front of me. Okay, is there a limit or guidance on the number of applications we can submit, lead or partner in? We actually haven't published that, but we should publish that, and I think we will get back to you. But my view is that we're not looking for multiple applications on this fund. Ralph?
Oh, sorry. So we imagine there's quite a lot of organisations who might partner in multiple different projects around the country. I can imagine that some of the major national charities may be partners in a range of regional partnerships, and that shouldn't hold you back from applying. But given the size of the fund and that we're looking to fund 12 to 24 projects, we would quite like to see that spread across a range of applicants, rather than funding multiple projects with a single lead applicant.
Yeah, I'd agree that we wouldn't necessarily expect to see them as multiple projects coming from the same lead, but you might be partnered. A gentleman has his hand up. Can I take your... Would you like to...
David West,
Forestry Commission. Sorry, I can't see you.
That's fine, Zelda. Don't worry. No, I was just going to add, and I know it's not a question, but one of the things that we have received quite a bit of feedback on is the fact that local authorities have got some very ambitious tree planting plans, often linked to net zero, and where they're really lacking resource at the moment is in terms of capacity to be able to actually turn those plans into reality. And so this fund is a fund that would enable such a local authority with a plan that was regionally significant, I would stress, to apply for funds. So I just thought I would throw that in.
Thank you, David. And someone else has their hand up. I can't see who it is. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, hi. So I'm just from the West of England Nature Partnership, and we have a community forest in our region, the Forest of Avon Trust, leading on that. And I just wanted to make sure it's absolutely clear. So if we're in a community forest region, a region covered by that Trees for Climate funding, is the whole region completely ineligible for the funding? Should we not submit an expression of interest, or is there something we could build on the Trees for Climate funding that's outside the scope of that funding that would be worth submitting an expression of interest for?
I've got some feedback coming through. So I'm not entirely clear on whether within that entire area or whether that area is nested within your entire area.
It's the entire, basically the areas completely overlap. They're the same.
Okay, so I think going back to the earlier point of DEFRA already funding a range of areas, and we want to increase funding across other parts of the country which are not already in receipt of DEFRA funding. We would largely be looking for projects outside of existing partnership areas.
Okay. So is that a case of don't bother submitting expression of interest?
If it were for a project looking to do a sort of regional woodland creation partnership, then yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks, Ralph. There is one other hand up as well, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, that's my hand.
No, sorry, you go first. I got my hand up, but I'll back out until you've delivered.
Okay, apologies. I can't see all the 400 or whatever applicants on or people are here, so I butted in. Apologies. It's Dave Lowe, Warwickshire County Council. Back to that region question. Are county councils a region, or should it be like Warwickshire, Coventry and Solihull local nature partnership sort of levels? Is there a de minimis of a region is what I think the question is. Districts and boroughs probably. Don't know. I'll let you answer.
So thanks very much for that question, David. And I think, as shown by the feedback we're getting in the comments, people would like quite a clear steer, and I don't think we've given that in the guidance. I think it's potentially one we'd like to come back on, and we could clarify in the guidance. But it's a local nature partnership, joining up multiple counties, like that sounds like what we are looking for. But if we could provide you a much clearer steer in the guidance, then we can take that one away and come back to you.
Yeah, we did discuss having a kind of hectareage or square kilometerage, but we decided not to go down that route because it can get very confusing. But I could see that we maybe need to come back with a slightly clearer definition of what we consider to be landscape scale. But if you've worked with Heritage Fund before on landscape partnerships, that was the kind of starting point for the kind of scale that we're talking about.
I think it's also worth saying, Zelda, isn't it, that we are looking for innovative approaches as well. And so if you are looking at a project that is slightly smaller than landscape scale, but you're using a really innovative approach in order to get trees planted at scale, for example, then that is something we'd be interested to hearing from.
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't get too hung up on a precise size. Would be my view. It's more to do with the quality of the proposal. What we're definitely not looking for, though, is very small, localized projects. So I think we just really wanted to communicate that it does need to be at a certain scale of not just a single woodland, not a single applicant. So that was where we were really keen to drive what we were not looking for.
And we can come back maybe with just a clarification in the guidance. Yeah. Both yourselves on the call and those who are not.
There's still one hand up there I can see.
There's Glenn.
Yeah, Glenn Gorner, Leeds City Council. This is probably a question for David West. I believe we're going to be meeting virtually, David, in a couple of weeks to talk about some other schemes in Leeds. My question, I did put it up on the Padlet, but I probably didn't phrase it too well. Leeds in West Yorkshire is part of the White Rose Forest, which in turn is part of the Northern Forest. The White Rose Forest covers the whole of West Yorkshire and the whole of North Yorkshire. In Leeds, we're fortunate that we've got a large production nursery to grow trees, but we'd like to expand this to provide trees for each local authority within the White Rose Forest and also for private estates. We're currently providing trees to the Environment Agency to grow in the upper air catchment for a flood risk management scheme. We've developed as a forest, we've developed a carbon-based tree planting strategy. So we've worked out what we need to do in each local authority. And what we do know is there's a shortage of trees. So in line with the England Tree Action Plan, we're wanting to expand our nursery capacity from the current 500,000 trees to approximately 3 million trees, so we can provide all partners across the region. It seems from the wording of this fund that because we're a community forest, part of the community forest, we'll be excluded from that. Is that true?
Would you like me to take a response to that initially, Ralph, or do you want to go forward?
I was just going to come back on the nurseries point, actually, David. So in one of my other hats, I do work on tree nursery policy, and I'm sure lots of people on the call will be happy to hear of your plans to expand a domestic tree nursery. We do need lots more of that. DEFRA does have other funding available for the expansion of tree nurseries and is developing further grants and interventions to help with that. I'd suggest that would be a more appropriate thing to look for the capital costs of developing tree nurseries, especially as there are some more commercial questions around intervening in a market, which we would be doing there. So suggest looking at other funds for those costs, though great to hear about your plans.
And I would say I look forward to having a conversation with you about the specifics of what your proposals are. I think just going back to this issue of funding within areas that are already identified or have already been in receipt of funding from Nature for Climate Fund. What we really want to avoid with this fund is sort of funding an initiative within an initiative within an initiative. We're really keen that if you are within a community forest, for example, that you work very much in partnership with that community forest and have discussions to see what scope there is for inclusion. If your project is completely outside of what the community forest is currently doing, which is probably unlikely, then there may be a case. But we're learning from experience with the with the Challenge Fund previously that we want to avoid a situation where we have funded initiatives within initiatives. It just causes confusion and it can cause problems for applicants as well. But I think going back to the Leeds one, I'm conscious that we're getting into some quite specific questions there. I'm very happy to have a conversation separately with you around those in due course.
Thank you.
I can see we've got a question from Jim Smith.
Yeah, so hi everyone, Jim Smith, Forestry Commission, local partnership advisor for Yorkshire and the North East. So it's just following up on that, what I think what Dave was talking about there about kind of areas that are already in receipt of Nature for Climate funding. There seems to be a little bit of confusion from partners in the background about the halo area, and if they are in the halo area, for example, of the Northern Forest, but not currently receiving funding from the existing community forest partnership, for example, or there isn't a community forest partnership set up in that area specifically, can they apply into this fund? Or is there an opportunity through the community forest partnership, Northern Forest area, to look at additional funding from them instead? So in the halo area, not receiving funding or support from the community forest partnership, can they apply into this fund, or do you think there'll be additional funding through the community forest partnerships?
So thanks very much for your question there. The principle, as David said, is we're not looking to confuse the funding landscape between different partners, but I will need to check back with my colleagues who work more directly on the community forest and Northern Forest projects regarding projects which are within the halo area. And there's quite a useful question in the Padlet, which hopefully will respond to this, about sharing a map of areas which are eligible and ineligible to apply, which I think would help answer this. We could develop that.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, we've got a question from Jacqueline.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question about match funding and how much, what proportion of match funding actually needs to be secured either at the point of expression of interest or if you get selected to the second stage. We run a tree sponsorship scheme, and so I know for sure we will get sponsorship in 2023, 2024, but obviously it's not bagged yet. Can I include that, or can I only include the money that we've actually got in the bank account, so to speak?
So I can answer that one. You don't have to have partnership funding secured at point of expression of interest. You don't have to have partnership funding secured at point of application either, but we would need to see proof of partnership funding having been secured if you had a grant award at point of grant award, or have a credible match funding plan in place to be monitored against, that you could provide the detail on. So I think we would want to know a little bit more detail at point of application on how you plan to raise that through the sponsorship team, and we would be assessing how realistic that seems. So hopefully that answers that one.
Thank you.
Right, we're getting close to end of time, so I'm just going to have a quick scan of the Padlet again. I think we've dealt with Halo, we've dealt with regional, we've dealt with national, we've dealt with partnership funding. Will there be penalties if not all money is spent, or if the 3 years up to March 25 for project delivery is overrun? We don't penalise as such, but that is the closure date for the fund, and to do with our funding arrangement between DEFRA and ourselves and Treasury, there would be no opportunity to extend past that date. So you wouldn't receive the full grant effectively. There won't be extensions beyond that date. So I would suggest that you make sure that your plans are deliverable by that cut-off point, and that includes financial reporting and evaluation. Again, so don't plan for delivery right up to March 25. You will need some time for final wrap in accounting and evaluation of the project. Ryan, is there anything else, or Jodie, is there anything else that you think is got multiple likes that needs?
So there's a question about the size of organisations here, asking whether we'll be prioritising a certain size or standing of organisations. So we will not be prioritising a certain size or standing of organisations, but as you'll have seen in the quality criteria explained by Zelda, we are looking at deliverability, appropriateness of partners, and, for example, comparing the size of grant request with the track record and funding which the applicant has managed in the past. You might not want to give a huge grant to someone who does not have that experience.
So someone's got a comment on that. Okay, what we will be doing is we will be writing up answers to we won't write up an answer to absolutely every single question, because there are some very, very specific ones there. If they are very specific, we suggest that you get in touch with us, and we'll deal with those separately. Can we just go back to the last slide?
Sorry, Zelda, just say there's a question there about where the film of this
oh yeah,
will be available. That would be worth answering now that my dog has stopped. Apologies for that.
So the film will be made available on our website. We'll email you the link to it, but it'll be on the it'll be a link coming out of the Trees Call to Action Fund pages on our website. Yeah, so if we can just return to the last slide, next steps. So just to stress again, do keep reading the guidance, and we'll do those supplementary FAQ by the middle of next week, which will wrap up some of the more detailed questions within the Padlet. That deadline is 12 noon on the 16th of November. Again, just to remind you that, and just to remind you to use that hashtag of DEFRA. So just to talk you through the timetable from there on, you should be notified from the result of the expression of interest by the 30th of November. There's a 7-week application window, so the full application deadline will be 12 noon on the 20th of January. And we'll be getting you a decision before the end of March, so that money will be committed before the financial year ends. As I said, this webinar recording and the FAQ should be available by the middle of next week, or sort of Tuesday, Wednesday, around about then. But in the meantime, if you have got further questions, I would ask you to wait if it's any of the questions that we've covered today, rather than emailing us with the same questions again. But if you have additional questions that you feel haven't been answered, you can send them to inquire@heritagefund.org.uk. Those of you who are invited to full application, we will be running a further webinar in the application period, which will go into more detail about the actual application process. So sort of hold your horses on that one is what I'd say. Right, well, I think we've got through a lot today. I hope that has been useful. Once we have finished, we will send you a really, really short evaluation survey. It's literally 4 or 5 questions. If you could fill that in, that would be helpful, just to let us know how we can improve our performance, and also just to give us an indication of whether or not you are thinking of applying, just helpful for us to gauge level of demand. Other than that, I think that is it. So thank you very much for attending. Great to see so many of you on the call, and best of luck.
Thanks very much, Zelda, and thanks very much all for coming.